Good evening and welcome to our Zoom open meeting this evening. We have Jim Herlihy, he's a fellow of our society, along to just talk to us about the policing in Ireland in 1922. Jim is the authority, as far as I'm concerned, on this whole subject, and he has written many publications which adorn our bookshelves. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jim, and thank you very much for joining this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared, and thanks for the invitation. I decided to give this talk last year in a few different places, just since it was the centenary of the Guards, but more importantly to me, it was the centenary of disbandment of the RIC, and a lot of it was happening, and of course the bicentenary of the Irish Constabulary, or the Constabulary of Ireland. And just the first slide that you can see there is what people would have seen, say, in 1922 as regards uniforms. You had the black and tans up in the top left corner there, leaving Ireland at the time. You had the auxiliaries just to the right there, another example of one of those. You had the Dublin Metropolitan Police, unarmed, and done with the exception of the G Division. And their name was changed to Paulini Auclea between 1922 and 1925. The crown was taken off the badges, and the three castles was inserted instead. You had the Garda Síochána, or the first called the Civic Guard, was formed in February of 1922, on the 9th of February. You had that other little slim one there. You can see a man there with an armband. That's the Cork Civic Patrol. Cork City had its own police force, of course. Being the rebel county, they don't do things the normal way, but they had their own police force in advance, because the irregulars were still holding Cork when the Guards were founded. And of course, then you had the Royal Ulster Constabulary, which was founded on the 1st of June of 1922. My interest mostly is in genealogy and in the individuals, and everything else comes as a result of that. And what I'm trying to do now is to see what happens and what records are available after 1922. In other words, the formation of the Guards, the disbandment of the RIC, and what happened to them afterwards, and can we trace them? And I'm working on those, say, how many went north, how many went to Palestine, etc. And the badges you can see there, another police force which you don't see there is, and you can see there's the badge that they have, Oriel House, Crime Investigation Department, Detective Officer. The Detective Officer, or DO, comes from the Dublin Metropolitan Police. And they're just the badges. And just briefly, in policing up to that time, the Brony Constabulary from 1787 up to 1822, you had the Peace Preservation Force, then coming up first form of task force, but in 1814, intermittently going up to 1836, but mainly from 1814 up to 1822. Then you have the County Constabulary up to 1836, with the Irish Constabulary 1836 to 67, and they got the Prefix Royal, and they were disbanded in 1922. That's for the country and for the main, and for Dublin City. Then you had the Dublin Police before 1836, and after 1836, overlapping up to 1925, and amalgamated, becoming the Dublin Metropolitan Division of the Garda Síochána in 1925. Just looking at the Royal Irish Constabulary, again, these are the same dates, and you can see the red uniform there at the top, the Peace Preservation Force. There was a type of red cloak that they had, the scarlet cloak, and the inverted stripes that you'd see in the uniforms of the RIC sergeant or acting sergeant, and the same was continued on to the Royal Ulster Constabulary. They get that actually from the Peace Preservation Force, because when these guys wore cloaks, they were cavalry sergeants in the Peace Preservation Force, and when they wore that cloak, you couldn't see the stripes if they were on their arms, so that's why they were down lower than it. And then the other police forces that you had were, say, Dublin Metropolitan Police, they said up to 25, Oriel House Detectives from 1922 up to 1923. They effectively become the detective branch of the Garda Síochána, some of them anyway do after 1923. I said in Cork, the Cork City Police, or the Cork Civic Patrol as they were called, and I explained, I'll come to them afterwards. The Civic Guard was formed on the 9th of February 1922, and it was restarted on Garda Síochána in 1923. The Droid Ulster Constabulary then formed on the 1st of June 1922, and it becomes the Police Service of Northern Ireland on the 4th of November 2001. And this is just a spectrum of uniforms the whole way across here. Now, a very interesting thing in the last year, I've made contact with the grandson of Sir Francis Fleming, and he's the gentleman who recruited the Black and Tans in London. And in the 1930s, his grandson actually made contact with me, and he told me that Sir Francis Fleming intended either making a film on the RIC or a book, and gave me the copies of all the correspondence. But more importantly, he in so doing and doing the research to do this, either film or documentary or book, he got onto Whitehall at the time, and he got all the circulars of every single officer's uniform from 1836 up to 1922, copied everything, gave it to me, and every uniform you see in front of there can be described in detail down to every thread that's in the uniform or badge that's in the uniform. So there are these little gems coming in all the time, and from the strangest of places and circumstances. Now, as regards stations, we're about approximately 1,600 stations at a peak there, and you can see the difference between 1919 and 1921 when we were left. And more importantly, for the guards heading out, the difficulties they had at the very start, either burned out stations, no cooperation from the public, thinking they were literally the RIC returning, and law and order broken down, and it was an absolute complete struggle at the start for them to get out. But that's just my interest goes back, for somebody who don't know of me, is that my father was 75 when I was born, 79 my brother was born, and my father had emigrated to America. He was a master tailor and came back and made uniforms for the RIC, and as a child I went everywhere with him, and even to a particular station. That's when he was in Boston. He came back in 1915, went straight to Liverpool, joined the British Army, joined the Territorials with the Royal Field Artillery, and of course they weren't supposed to go to war, but the first wave went and were nearly all killed, and he was in the second wave, and he was injured and came back, and he left me with a trunk full of stuff, and like, these are just some of the bits and pieces I have. This would be his discharge papers, and he got to meet a gentleman there on the right hand side of the photograph, Lieutenant General Sir Adrian, Captain Dept VC. My father was his tailor. My father fought at the Somme, and this man won the BC at the Somme. And he left me. My father tailored his last uniforms, and that's just one of them that he's wearing one day at a time. And I have that uniform, and I have that's the Sam Brown belt that I have is the one he actually was wearing when he won the BC at the Somme. And lots of other bits and pieces of uniforms also. And it started for me very young as a child with all. I was a set of miniatures belonged to him. That's his mistress uniform. And I mentioned there the station, Carrick Road Station. My father was making uniforms for the RIC the week that station was being attacked. And they knew they were getting out because they had a hole made in the wall to go into the place next door. And this is just after the attack in June of 1920. And there was a story went out. It was like Fiddling While Rome Burned, that the fiddler that Beach and Fane made the headlines. And I said someone was using a bit of poetic license, because what was happening was, I've got a photograph since of a guy playing the fiddle, but it's after the event. And things had really turned full circle for me in that the station, when it was attacked, was actually raised in the House of Commons afterwards. And it was raised with the intentions of getting a memorial for the RIC. And you can see Sir Hammer Greenwood was asked by Colonel Ashley, who was actually Mountbatten's father-in-law, as to the erection of a roll of honour. Also, Blarney Station was attacked at the time. This is one of the uniforms one of the last ones my father tailored. And you can see the photograph was taken in 1924. He had his uniform and he stood in for a photograph for it. By coincidence, Blarney Station was also attacked the same week in 1920. And I spent 29 and a half years in the Guards in that particular station. And as soon as I arrived, this is the station attacked. And this is the last sergeant. And when I arrived there in 1980, I tracked down the daughter of the last sergeant and walked through this, the station with her. And that was used afterwards for the Michael Constable. All the artifacts that she described were in the station at the time. And again, for the window shakes to Barley. I was looking for information from people at the time and on the radio, and I got a phone call from this lady saying, I'll be live one for you. And I said, what do you mean? She said, my father's alive, he was an RIC man. So I went straight up to Dublin to him. He lived to be 100. I went out of tape after 2.5 hours, and I'm still learning from what he has told me. And he celebrated his 100th birthday, and I got to present him with a statuette for his 100th birthday in 1996. And also in the picture there is the curator of the Garda Museum, and to the right then is the curator of the RUC Museum's unique photograph at the time. My first book was, again, towards the genealogy side of it. I had about 2,000 names at the back of the book. I was trying to show the route that I had taken at the time. And I got so much correspondence as a result of that, people saying it's not in the book. People never realized that there was 85,028 passed through the system. I had only 2,000 names, and any wonder they wouldn't be in the book. And then I did a complete list, and the information started flooding in at that stage. So I decided to create a database with 85,000 pages and 28 pages. And it meant that once that book was done, everything I got was a hit. It would stick somewhere. All you had to do was stick the number on it. I now have over 21,500 photographs got from relatives. The book was revised in 2016. I can't believe there's actually 7 years already. And then I discovered that there were 1,700 officers. And just shows how much information has come in. So that book was published in 2016. There was 246 photographs in it. I now have 1,473. I just counted a while ago. And then, of course, there was another police force, the Irish Revenue Police from 1832 to 1857. 2,500 policemen chasing poteen makers for 25 years. And just finished this book. I'm just at the final stages of it. The Royal Irish Constabulary Auxiliary Force. To me, it is really the blueprint for the Black and Tans, because there were huts during the Land War between 1881 and 1883. There were 440 policemen are recruited between the ages of 20 and 40. And they were actually called the piebald police at one stage, or they were also called the magpies, because they had this an RIC uniform, but they had white epaulets. And these were the guys who occupied the huts and the temporary stations around the country where the area was proclaimed as a result of landlords being constantly attacked. There's 440 of them. I have the complete list in the book, and I also, more importantly, have a complete list of the huts and the hut stations and the temporary stations and their proximity to each of the stations at the time before that's why you have some RIC stations, the most obscure places after 1883. They become huts first. Huts are dropped into the place, it becomes a temporary station, and eventually becomes a permanent station. And this is where I came across the first one of those on a certificate, on a marriage certificate, Auxiliary Force RIC, and it was 1882. I thought it was a misprint. And then went to records and I found it. As you know, there's no memorial to the RIC, but it would look something like this with the 642 lives that were lost. And what more importantly, really, is the manner in which they were killed. Just for an example, 111 were shot off bikes. 70 were just assassinated, and either in shops, pubs, hotels, restaurants, and trains, going to a dance, at a race meeting, out driving with friends, fishing and swimming. That's the real story that has to be told eventually. 32 were shot at home. And of course, there were some of them killed in accidents, then 8 in traffic accidents. 25 were abducted, 4 retired. 45 were killed after the truce. And one of the most horrific ones was the Sergeant Tobias Gibbons and Sergeant John Gilmartin, who were shot in hospital, in nursing home in recuperating in March of 22. And the last one was shot on the 13th of October 1922, a guy just collecting his pension, and it was and shot. We managed to, since we couldn't get a memorial in Ireland or the way about it, we managed to get over 500 descendants to the Gareth Chapel in London, April of last year, mostly connected to those casualties. Now, there is no war memorial either to the RIC because 752 RIC men volunteered for 1 month for about one service. And 178 lost their lives. I found every one of the graves matched with the War Graves Commission, and that will be published in hopefully in November of this year. And these are the various regiments and the uniform badges that they would have been wearing at the time. Of course, the majority were Irish Guardsmen. And now what was happening in 1922 is that the RIC were leaving. And this is just a card of, in 1921, nothing like this would appear anyway, but they actually held a dance down in Wexford on 24th of February. All these panoramic photographs are all of that period. I've been standing in for the last time. And the handover of which is now the Garda Depot, handed over to the Civic Guards on the 14th of May by the RIC at that stage. And now a lot of them, as you can, anybody reading the pension records, that so many of them had to go to England and they collected their pensions there. The pension records, which have come online, illustrate that and actually give some very addresses. They all look after this network in England, looking after one another as regards jobs and that. You see a pattern emerging if you're looking at them long enough. Again, this is another Disbandment photograph. And then back to Ship Street in Dublin, handing in their uniforms, handing in their kits. And then the officers then in the Phoenix Park Depot, which is now Garda headquarters, like the military regiments, they had collected silver over the years from the time the depot opened in 1842, and this was all divided up between them. That's these are some of the artifacts that were divided up. Some of them have found their way back to, well, individual collections, but some in the Garda Museum and some in the PS9 Museum. A lot of officers, when they got promoted, some became resident magistrates, and they presented before they left. They presented like something like this, like a candelabra, to the depot. Just examples, some of the records that have come up. This is the gentleman on the left, Samuel Lee Wilson, who was killed in Gorey in 1920. This is a receipt for the time he was staying there, and the signature of the other man who was in charge of the depot, or in charge of that place at the time. And every officer from 1842 up to the very end took snuff out of this box. It's now in Buckingham Palace. This is the mess reading room they had in the depot. The Sergeant's Mess. Recently, I've got a copy of the last records of the Sergeant's Mess, and that was kept by the head constable major in the depot. And the attention to detail and it's absolutely spectacular. The amount of 2 months before they were leaving the depot, say in May, in March, they had their accounts up to date, and this is just one page of it. They were paying off everybody, receipted with stamps, and this is for, say, the cook and 3 the waitresses that they had in the mess at the time. They were given £20 each, and they had to sign the receipt. There were some RIC men who had actually gone out to Palestine, and they sent out whatever they were due. It was divided up between those who joined the mess at the time. This is the amount of drink that was consumed into the mess in March of 1922, down to every last drop. And these are some of the artifacts that were sold off. They were auctioned off between them, and some of them have found in the private collections at the moment. Now, when the RIC were disbanded, they got 12 years onto their service. The reasons why very few of them joined the Garda Síochána is that their pay was the same. They would be effectively working for nothing. And the ones that, there's 181 joined the Civic Guards. And then you have 788 went out to Palestine, and 1,519 eventually joined the Royal Ulster Constabulary. I'd match record for record with each of the Civic Guards, the Palestine Gendarmerie, and Royal Ulster Constabulary. Others went off in different careers. This is a gentleman who became a barrister. And there's correspondence with, a lot of correspondence turned up between the officers after 1922. And the officers had, they formed an association in London, and eventually they decided that they would have some memorial, not in Ireland, but in the UK at the time. And eventually they got one up here at St. Patrick's Chapel in Westminster Cathedral, and another one in St. Paul's Cathedral in the crypt in 1939. And they were unveiled by the former Inspector General of the RIC, Brigadier General Borden. One of the earliest books I found on it was actually published in 1924, The Trail of the Black and Tans. And this, on the Tans, this is a typical picture kind of the period. Everybody probably associates with it. The Tans all went their separate ways. 29 of them went out to Palestine. 335 of the Special Reserve went out there. And none of the veterans and drivers, they were too old at the time. And that's the book I did on the Tans. And of course, probably one of the most famous Tans was William Hill, the bookmaker. And he started the business, you can see here, as a result of the gratuity. He says the gratuity, but he actually got compensation. He was injured down in Middleton. Another Tan who went on, who ended up in the Royal Hong Kong Police. And there are these little outposts called Macintoshes on the border there. Now the auxiliaries, they were disbanded. They had, some of them had also had out to Palestine. They suffered 43 casualties, and 181 of them ended up in Palestine with the gendarmerie. Now, a lot of people don't realise that they published a magazine here, and it was real send up of what their life was in Ireland. They said, first of all, life with Cadet, he said. He was born grousing. He becomes a Boy Scout. He joined the army and eventually obtained a commission, but he was demobbed. He took up pre-war position on the curb, and then he became an auxiliary cadet, rising to the rank of acting section leader, unpaid. And with his gratuity from the RIC and being one of the lucky blighters, he managed, heaven knows how, to get a subsistence allowed paid. So he bought a coal mine during a strike. But after dodging jerrys, shinners, and income tax officials, he tripped over a kiddie's hook and passed away. Now come to the Dublin Metropolitan Police. They were amalgamated with the Garda Síochána in 1925, and they henceforth became known as the Dublin Metropolitan Guards, and they were policing the Dublin Metropolitan area. 20 of those were killed between 1836 and 1925. Now, the Heart Society, which we founded to remember the RIC, and I say the decade of centenaries, there were so many lost opportunities in reconciliation, and this is just one of them that we happily capture ourselves. We realized that nothing was happening as in the decade of centenaries to remember the police. And here you have the first, not alone the first policeman to be killed in 1916, but the first casualty in 1916 of the Rising. And he was killed by Sean Connolly, unarmed DMP man at the gate Dublin Castle, just come up to him and shot him. And we were commemorating to the minute when this other young girl came along and wanted to put down flowers. We had descendants of James O'Brien there, and we didn't know what a connection was, and we asked her, and she says, the reason I put it down the floor, she said, is I'm commemorating, she said, my great granduncle, the man that shot him. And that's one that reconciliation, a completely missed opportunity to go. Even the British ambassador on the day laid a wreath. Another example of it was Inspector John Mills in 1917. He, Count Plunkett, he was had a meeting, and the meeting was proclaimed, and he was asked to desist from it, so he ended up being arrested. And as he was being brought to the station, Inspector Mills was accompanying him. He was hit with a hurley down the back of the head, which he died shortly afterwards as a result of it. Now, this is his grave in Mount Jerome, which we cleaned up. The man that hit him, or the young fellow that hit him at the time, in 1932, is applying for his IRA pension, and in the pension, he said, pension application, he says about getting the inspector. But the thing about it is, tell you how complicated and how strange police history is. He was applying for his IRA pension on Garda-headed notepaper. He was now a member of the Garda Síochána, applying for an IRA pension after killing an inspector. So we tracked down his grandnephew, or his nephew and a grandnephew of the policeman, and both shook hands across the inspector's grave 100 years to the minute. Again, another lost opportunity. Dublin Metropolitan Police that went off to the war and got killed. This is the list we presented a plaque on our Mrs. Day, 100 years again to the minute. And the badges changed at the time. This is the first mention of the DMP helmet with the badge on it. And it has the three castles, and you can see the crown is well gone. And these are the buttons were all changed, the buckle, the buttons, and the cap badge, and it's a day and night helmet badges. Roy Willoughby, who was head of sports in RTE, his grandfather was George Willoughby, chief superintendent in the Dublin Metropolitan Police, and later on to the Garda Síochána. And as I said, they were amalgamated in April 1925. Now, Sebastian Barry, I've just found a connection with him, and the steward of Christendom, the play is about his great grandfather, James Thomas Dunn, as he calls him. Well, in fact, his name was actually James Dunn, and he was well gone before it happened. But what he doesn't realise is that this is the play here. This is him sitting in the centre, one of the very few photographs of the DMP that are around, the man with the moustache in the centre. In 1916, they marched out, went out to the range, and it was completely called back to desist from having any part in it. Here he is on the left-hand side. He's wearing 4 medals at the time, 1917. Again, he's in the front left there again, the man with the moustache. Now, what happened to me was that I was in the Garda Museum one day, and I got a phone call from a company in Scotland who had his medals, and they were coming up for sale, but they had not much information on them. So I gave them the information, and about a year later,
Jim, can you hear us?
had a complete file on him, and I was asked to want the medal, so not the medal, but the file, and I have the file. That Chief Commissioner of the Dublin Metropolitan Police was W.R.A. Murphy, and he remained deputy for nearly the next 30 years in the Garda Síochána. His son actually married the sister of Dan Herlihy, the actor, and Michael Herlihy, the film director. Again, the 2 books I did on the Dublin Metropolitan Police, 12,566. The registers, as you know now, have been released by the Garda Museum online. And the Oriel House Detectives, this was their headquarters Orient House in Westland Road. And a very rare photograph of them is on the funeral of Arthur Griffith. They're actually sitting out of the windows up on top. The reason they were formed is that you still had what you call criminality going on, even though you had the unarmed guards there at the time. So, but they were like a political police at the same time. No, and very few bits and pieces have survived in relation to them. They had a special badge, and I went through. They were armed with the Colt revolver. They also had this Lewis machine gun on the roof of Orient House. They had Lee Enfield rifles, and I went through the list of transport when they were disbanded. And these are the type of cars that they had. Can you imagine it's like something in New York or Al Capone country or this type of thing? The list and the makes of cars that they had available to them at the time. This is a Ford Tourer, an Austin Seater, an Overland touring car, the Sidley DC car, a Talbot car. This is the photographs with their Ford Tourer converted. Another one. And the badge that they had, same area you can see it, the thing, Orient House, Criminal Investigation Department. Now, it had a piece of leather on the inside, and the reason the badge was pinned onto that, and there was a pin went through it, and you wore that inside your coat. And the whole idea was when they were reporting and going to Dublin Castle, if you put your hands in your pocket, there's a chance you could have got shot. So they would have flashed the badge by just opening the coat. Some of them have come out in collections. Several of them were stolen in a raid, and some of those in the raid have found their way back to the Garda Museum and in private collections. And these are the numbers. The ones were stolen and the ones that had survived. And they were the detective officer Thomas Fitzgerald, yeah, he was 22. He was killed, and his was the first thing in the Irish state for killing an Orient House man. This is another man that was killed, memorial to him. And this is another man who was in the DMP, now in the new Criminal Investigation Department, and he was on duty in the station in Brunswick Street when a man came in and killed him with a hatchet on over the head. This is his badge and his IRA medal. This is revolver. There's notebooks. And you see detective officer down there, and he's buried in Glasnevin. He's lived in Glasnevin. Captain Nolan Mass, Sean Mass's brother, his body was found up the Dublin Mountains, and was found by Garda John O'Leary, who was an ex-RIC seaman on a search. And it is believed that the Orient Housemen were complicit in his killing. Now, coming to the Civic Guard, you had the inaugural meeting on the 9th of February 1922, where Michael Collins needed professional policemen, so he wrote out to district inspectors in the RIC who had helped him during the War of Independence. Recruiting began on 21st of February, transferred to Kildare in 25th of April. You had a mutiny on the 16th, 17th of May. Eventually they came back into Dublin Castle, took over Dublin Castle on 17th of August. That was reenacted last year by the anniversary, reenacting the 75th anniversary of the Guards also. And General Nona Duffy appointed as commissioner. Now, these are just all the events for just more detail. And this is a sample, this is just one of the letters that Michael Collins is writing out at the time to RIC District Inspector Paddy Walsh, who becomes Deputy Commissioner afterwards. And he's stationed in Letterkenny at the time. This is, it's hard to imagine, but it's Michael Collins writing out in a formal letter to a District Inspector inviting him. And that's him in the two uniforms, one in the RIC uniform and the other in the in the Garda uniform. Now, the organising committee, as you can see, were made up of General Michael Collins, of course, Richard Mulcahy, some sitting TDs, but more importantly, members of the Dublin Metropolitan Police and members of the RIC. And here's just some of the photographs of some of them. And even the Minister at the time, Eamon Duggan, TD, his great-grandfather was, grandfather and great-grandfather were both RIC men, with Paddy Walsh. Matthias McCarthy, one day he's a sergeant in the RIC, next day he's a chief superintendent in the Garda Síochána. Michael McCormick on the very right-hand side is a very, very interesting character. When he was in the RIC, he ended up actually in the intelligence office in the Garda depot. He infiltrated up with Patrick Reardon, as you can see down further, a man who was decorated for the Royal Visit Queen Victoria in 1900. Such a curious mix, and of course you have Eamon Bry and the Bry Harriers in the 1930s, they called after him. Michael Joring, who was an assistant commissioner and ends up, he leaves and gets killed in the Civil War. And then anybody of the committee, members of the Guards who want to join at the time had to do a local exam. They had to obtain a referee for a clergyman and undergo a medical, and then they were sent with their fate to the RDS in Dublin, trained in Dublin. 96% of the recruits are former IRA men, and the first Civic Guards, the first two recruited in 1922, 249 are from Clare, that's and Galway and Mayo, most west of Ireland. They're paid, these are the pay at the time. As I said, the RIC paid, or the RIC, those who were lucky enough to get pensions on disbandment. It wasn't worth their while, but the ones who did join, they promoted those and made them instructors to bring them above the level. Their RIC pension was suspended until, and when they left the Guards, they ended up with two pensions. These are just some of the cartoons of the day about them. And this is them heading out to a bog station at the time. And this is some of the facilities they would have walked into to find the place abandoned and things like that. And not a lot of places they got no cooperation. They just had to bring a book, a diary, and just start up and set up as policemen. The first time they're seen in public, as you can see there in Civic, is Frank Lawless's funeral in April. And then after Griffith's funeral, they're seen in uniform for the first time. These are just some photographs I got of the handover around Dublin Castle. An auxiliary actually had all these photographs as grandson gave it. You can see, barely you can see that that's the gate just before it was opened, before the handover on the 17th of August 1922. And these are the Guards, Civic Guards walk in there for the first time. The man there with the hat in the centre is Michael Staines, the first Garda Commissioner, son of an RIC man. And to his left there is Matthias McCarthy, as I said, a sergeant in the RIC one day, chief superintendent of the Guards the following day. And that's them again, another photograph of them. That's them above it in Dublin Castle. Now, Michael Staines, son of an RIC man, after the mutiny, he resigned, and Ono Duffy took over after him. And last year, there was a memorial put up to him. The Guards at the very start were trained in the use of firearms, but as a result of the mutiny, one of the things of that inquiry was that they were not to be armed, and also no politicians. You had Michael Staines was actually a TD, so from that time onwards, no politician could be a Guard at the same time. Eamon Duggan, he was the son of an RIC sergeant and the grandson of an RIC constable. Also, he was a signatory to the treaty. I said Michael Joring was killed during the left and killed during the War of Independence. The few DMP men that were there was Constable Thomas Neary, who actually was given a medal for when Constable Michael Downey, a DMP man, was shot. He donated blood. You could see him there in hospital, just have donated the blood and be presented with a medal by the Chief Commissioner of the DMP. And sadly, he was drowned in the River Shannon on the 1st of July 1948. He'd been appointed a superintendent in the Guards, but he resigned to go back farming. He had enough of it. Probably the most interesting character is Guard number 1, in that he did everything wrong. Guard number 2 did everything right. Got promoted, kept his head down, kept his mouth shut. But this guy is such a colourful character. From Westport in County Mayo, the first commissioner was also from County Mayo, Michael Staines, and he possibly told him to get down to Dublin and join. But before that, he joined the RIC. He volunteered for World War service in the Irish Guards Regiment. He was appointed the first member of the Civic Guard on 21st of February 22. He ran into difficulties in that some guy called him a black and tan. He clocked him and he had to leave. So he then joined the Irish Army, and then he joined the Dublin Metropolitan Police, and then he emigrated to the United States and Canada, but he had left the family here in Ireland. And when I came across him I met his son. A guard told me that he said he was visiting a person in Cork in the hospital, and he said that there's a guy above there. He said his father was the first guard. I went up to him. He had this photograph up in his locker. It's actually an Irish Guardsman, Lance Corporal in the Irish Guards, and that's his father in World War One. And I asked him, when did his father die? He said, I don't know, probably sometime in the 40s, he said, in America. And so what happened was he lost contact completely with his father. His father had a second family in New York and died over there. And we reunited both families anyway, and we got a plaque put up to him in Westport. On the left-hand side there, you'll see he's actually training the Civic Guards in the RDS at the time. And there's 2 grandsons, one on his first marriage and one the second marriage, meeting for the first time, and the plaque unveiled to them last year in Westport, directly across from his house. He's actually connected to the family tree, connected to Dave Fanning. I found his grave in Albany, New York. His second wife was Austrian Jewish. He, as I said, he had family here and in America at the time, and I put a cap edge on his grave. Now, the RIC who transferred and joined the Garda Síochána, you had 8 district inspectors, 2 head constables, 4 sergeants, and 167 constables. And that translated into, 1 became a deputy commissioner, 4 became chief superintendents, 1 superintendent, 1 inspector, 64 sergeants, and 97 guards. This is another man who had been Inspector James Gunn, was a spy for Collins, and he's the guy who fingered Swansea for assassination above in Lisburn. This is the man who designed the Garda crest. And on the morning of the truce, again, how strange policing is in Ireland and how events turn full circle. The man on the left is known as Sandy Clark, Alexander Clark. On the morning of the truce, he was returning from duty in Skibbereen, and the gentleman on the right, a neighbour, later shot him that morning. Now, his daughter at the time witnessed the killing, never spoke about it until the 11th of June 1929, when the man who killed him, at this stage was Detective Garda, Timothy O'Sullivan, above in County Clare, was killed on duty. And the daughter spoke for the first time. So here you have an RIC man killed by a man who is now on the Garda, the Roll of Honour. The Cork Civic Patrol, coming to the Cork Civic Patrol, as I said, Cork was still being held by the irregulars in 1922. The garrison, although they were formed in February, did not come to Cork until until November of 1922. And the Cork Civic Patrol was the business interests in Cork decided to form their own police force in the interim, called the Cork Civic Patrol, or the Cork City Police. And they wore armbands with just CCP on them at the time. They directed traffic, they investigated crime. In fact, they had one very good case where they tracked the man all the way out to Australia. These are just RIC men that would have been in Cork before that, and that's what it looked like. There's some of the last photographs taken in Cork at the time. This is the man who was head constable in the Bridewell. And I mentioned earlier, he's one of the founding members of the Garda Síochána, and these were his medals. They're in the Garda Museum. He handed over one of the stations in Cork in 1922. The stations that were handed over were burned actually by the irregulars in Cork. And these are some of the stations. This is one. The station on the left-hand side was McCurtain Street, with King Street Station, and that was bombed at the time. And they moved to this other station here, Empress Place, from it. Just one of the last photographs taken in 1922, just outside Union Quay Station. Now, this is the handover of the station. This is Lord Mayor of Cork handing over the station, receiving the keys from John Moran, military MC, on the right, to Lord Mayor of Cork, Donald O'Callaghan. Now, the Captain Moran, the district inspector, this is him. He was in the Leinster Regiment. This is his account. He was on duty at the time of the burning of Cork. And this is a letter, the original letter I got from his, from a constable, Haslam, his son. And he got it from Captain Moran, who at this stage became a priest in Wales. And he did some, he would be looking for funds for a cathedral in Wales at the time. This Union Quay was, as I said, was burned. And then this is the setting up of the Cork Civic Patrol. It was ads put in the paper. They opened up an account in the Munster and Leinster Bank, and they were looking for recruits. And they formed the headquarters in Morrison's Island, Moore's Hotel. This is a group of them here, and a number in that group end up joining the Civic Guards afterwards. And in 1997, they got a plaque put up for the 75th anniversary of the Cork Civic Patrol, been policing Cork for that brief period. Now, this is the funeral of Michael Collins going through Cork. You see the hearse on the right-hand side. And there was the guards hadn't arrived. This is in August 22. The guards hadn't arrived until November. Cork Civic Patrol was set up in August, and the RIC were gone at this stage. So the Cork Civic Patrol escorted the remains, and you can see in the crowd there's just a few with armbands there. And more importantly, this is on the right hand side, and you can see just one at the front, all these guys in plain clothes with the armbands form the Guard of Honour. Now, what actually happened with that, in order to do that at the time, the man who was in charge of them, Jeremiah Murphy, had been in the IRB, respected by Collins, to set up the police force in Cork. And he ends up being a chief superintendent of the guards. And the bill for hiring out the car amounted to £1.10. And it followed him all the way up to his time in the guards. It was unpaid at the time. And that's they also had one patrol car, and this is an example of the type of car that they had at the time, and it was hijacked and burned out. And this is another building, the Soldiers' Home, Ballincollig. That building was also burned out. And one of them was, this is his application, a Cork Civic headed notepaper, applying to join the guards. And he joins and he becomes inspector 2 days later. They had one fantastic case in where they tracked this fella, a con man, all the way out to Australia. And some of them actually went over to London with members of the Civic Guards and collected them. And this is being lodged, and this is a jail record in Cork at the time. And this is gazettes, that's even all the way across the UK, the complete utter con man. Tracked him out and eventually ends up in the South Australian Police Gazette with a great description. I'm gonna call him the whole time, was all the different tattoos that he had, and with his few names that he had, he actually changed the name, and I tracked down members of his family years ago and put on family tree in them. And as regards the patrol car that they had, this is another bill. And Eamon Coogan, Tim Pat Coogan's father, was Deputy Commissioner, and you can see at the top of the page there, that's a letter from him. And he, Jeremiah Murphy had covered his tracks, and that he had been given instructions, and he names exactly the authority that he had for the repair of the patrol car and also the bill. Now, Michael Staines at the time, the Commissioner, about sending the Civic Guard to Cork, he said it was unwise in September. They were crying out to get the Guards to go to Cork, but he said it was too dangerous, and it was a really fantastic decision on the day, because he said, from what he says in the letter, he recommended that they didn't send them at the time. It would have been an absolute bloodbath. And these are the arrangements of the Civic Guard for Cork, and they came down by boat. Superintendent Eamon Cullen, George Dwyer, and Superintendent Eamon O'Duffy. He goes on to form the Guards in Bandon. And this is a letter back from Superintendent Cullen. Actually, he's writing to his father on this headed note paper, and he said, what he says about the Cork Civic Patrol is that the CCP, God bless them, are not a bad lot at all. Under a real good lad, Lieutenant Walsh, they patrol around the city suburbs, looking after drunks and street vendors, top whippers, marble games, and when anything serious happens, like good policemen, they disappear. I mean, any irregular stunt. And that's the telegram that was sent, very simply done, from Garrett's Dublin to Garrett's Cork. And this is the boat that came down. And there was this is the stamp that they had, the headquarters in Union Quay. They continued until 1923, jointly with the Guards. And in 1997, there was a reenactment done and a plaque unveiled to them. This is one photograph of one of the first checkpoints in December 22. And yeah, this is another one of the Eamon Cullen's letters. Now, the thing about it is the first court cases, I came across them, and what's absolutely crazy about it is that there were no courts sitting when the Cork Civic Patrol were set up, and there were fellows who were just lodged in jail for housebreaking larcenies, and there was no way of getting them released because there was no court sitting. And some of the Cork Civic Patrol members actually were the arresting members and gave evidence and had to come back to, and you can see some of the petty crimes that were there at the time. But some guys were 3 months inside in prison. The last one there, John Murphy, arrested by John Murphy CCP, James Christopher. He was discharged and been 5 weeks waiting in prison for trial for just being drunk and disorderly. These are just the very first cases. Peter Fahey, the first inspector to arrive in Cork, married the daughter of the local RIC, former RIC sergeant, and he's seen at this funeral afterwards. The photographed this funeral. Then things settled down in Cork, and all these other stations opened up. Now, as regards the Palestine Gendarmerie, there was a circular issue on 25th of January 1922, Dublin Castle, inviting members to join the Palestine Gendarmerie. And these are the terms and conditions are much the same as the RIC. And these are just the buttons and that of the particular uniform. These are some of the ads of the day. And as a result, anyway, 850 eventually joined from Ireland, 181 of the auxiliaries. 243 of the old regular RIC also went out there. And they went on the city of Oxford and stopped off, and that's them lined out from Gibraltar on the way out there. Some of them got killed on duty and they're buried out there. These are their temporary graves, and these now are their permanent graves out there. These are some of the RIC men, casualties. Michael Sylvester O'Rourke, I've got about 20 different paintings that he has done in colour and they're the only colour photographs or equivalent of photographs of the gendarmerie and the Palestine police at the time. ex-RIC man. He ends up eventually becoming Commissioner of Police in Kenya. And this is just one example of one of his drawings. There's some more of them. Another RIC man who becomes a priest was one of the Listowel mutineers, Thomas Hughes. That's John Moran again. And now the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Well, Ulster Constabulary formed on the 1st of June 1922. The terms and conditions were the same again as the RIC. It was really a continuation of the RUC, of the RIC. And if you look at the books of the day, the changeover in the station diary, it's just Irish is struck out and Ulster just put in. And of the 1,519, this is the makeup of them. There was 11 county inspectors, 38 district inspectors, head constables. I have the names of every single one of them at this stage and matched. Now the native counties of the 1,519, 1,417 of them were ex-RIC men born in Ireland. Majority of those, you can see there's 128 from Donegal. The border stations are people from the border stations, so they effectively were nearly going home. And 113 from Cavan. And you see there's actually one from born in India, there's one in Singapore. Now, more importantly, where were they serving at the time? And you can see there that 23 RIC men who were serving in Cork transferred, joined the RUC. 120 from Down, Gormston Camp, the 27 in the depot continued up there, 31 Reserve, which is also on the depot, and 44 in Gormston. But there's very few, say Cavan had only 8 that were serving at the time. And as regards religion, 552 were Catholic, 717 were Protestant. You see the breakdown. This is just 3 brothers who were in the RIC. 2 of the 3 joined the RUC afterwards. Jimmy Kennedy, who worked Red Sails in the Sunset and all of that, he was the son of an RIC man. He's just RIC descendants. You have David Trimble, and of course Tony Connolly. His grandfather was in the RIC, Cornelius Sullivan. And afterwards, for their RIC service, they continued to get decorations in the RUC, to some of the newspaper accounts. As I said, the court system was the adaptation of an accident act in the 20th of December. They transferred the same laws that were being used before that up to continued by reason of this act in December of 1922. And when the petty session was closed, you would justice of the peace and ordinary court sittings. Now, what's very interesting in coming across this, the 1923 Committee of Inquiry into Resignations and Dismissals from the Royal Irish Constabulary. Now, the committee was to inquire into the cases of men who resigned or were dismissed from the Royal Irish Constabulary during the period, the 21st of January 1919, the start of the War of Independence, up to the truce, the 11th of July, and to report to the government those cases in which it considers that the resignations and dismissals were caused by the national sympathies of the resigned dismissed members. Now, 955 former RIC men applied for pensions. Now, these pensions were to be paid by the Irish government. You had the regular RIC men who stayed until disbandment, or you had those who were pensioned shortly before it, in receipt of pensions. But these are resigned and dismissed men if they could prove that while they were in the service, they were literally spies for the IRA. 955 initial applicants applied, and this number increased to a final number of 1,215 in 1936. So if all of those were supposed to be telling the truth, that the potential was that your 1,215 spies in the RIC at the time. Now, 489 were granted, and eventually that went up to 574, and including 57 who were then serving in the Guards, And of these, 43 continued serving on, so they'd end up getting a Garda pension, and an RIC pension paid by the Irish government, and 14 left the service. 466 were refused. And the final number refused in 1930 of 641, including 5 serving in the Civic Guards, 4 continued on, and 1 just left the service. Now, what's more important, in those 100 of those applications have survived, and there is some absolutely fantastic information in them, in that whereas the full RIC service record hasn't survived, as we know, without only, I think there's only 7 sample files in the public records of the National Archives. In these ones, they're applying from literally all over the world. This is just one of them now, Nicholas Nolan, 6704. He's applying from the Bronx in New York, applying for this this pension. But more importantly, he says where he was serving in Tulla, Gran, Carr, Ballinrowan, Scariff, Connolly, Newmarket and Fergus, 6 Mile Bridge. And he resigned account of the political situation at the time. Some of them go into details, they actually go into a full page of the type of information that they were giving at the time to prove that they were entitled to these pensions. Well, it's a fascinating study of them. Another one here, Constable James Lucy, owing to the murder and disgraceful conduct of Black and Tans, my patriotic sentiments would not allow me to do otherwise. From the time of resignation of my departure. Now, there's an awful lot of guys, those who thought they were successful at the time, when they were making the application. Now, the British did not verify anything at this stage. They wouldn't say what the registered numbers were, but eventually, as part of the treaty, the pensions of the Black and Trans and the auxiliaries were to be paid by the British government. But the pensions of the regular RIC were to be paid by the Irish government. And there are debates going on for the next, up to the 1930s. And eventually, there's one fee paid over by the Irish government to clear that, and the British Paymaster General pay the pensions after that. But there's some fascinating information in those. And finally, this is just a sample of people who've ancestors in the RIC. And questions and hopefully some answers.